All right. I think we have everybody. I just started the recording and transcription, so I think we're set there. Good afternoon. My name is Gunnar Abrahamson. I'm an ARPA project coordinator for DDS. Good to see everyone on the call. I think we are missing a couple folks. I know Sean Bannon, our Ops Center director, is not going to be able to join us today. I also know Barry Simon will not be joining us. I think he had a scheduling conflict. But good to see everyone. I think it's been a number of months since I participated on one of these calls, I think going back as far as January of this year. So I hope you're all doing well. Hope you're enjoying your summer and some of this beautiful weather that we're having. We got a few agenda topics that we want to cover with you guys today. We want to talk about some metrics around the STEP initiative. As always, we want to talk a little bit about Deloitte, our consultant who assisted us with the rollout and development of the STEP initiative. We want to talk to you about them and their contract having wound down on June 30th. And then I know my colleague Sarah Olem, our ARPA planning manager, is going to talk to you a bit about some updated vacancy guidance that we have for the STEP initiative. So I think if I remember correctly, first order of business, Keith, if you want to do the honors and read the meeting rules.
Sure, this is Keith Lavalette, DDS. The meeting of the ARPA Advisory Transformation Committee are public meetings as defined by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act and should follow these guidelines. As this public meeting is held virtually, it will be recorded and made available to view on the DDS website. Committee members must make a good faith effort to state their name and title if applicable each time they speak during the meeting. If a committee member would like to speak, please raise your hand and one of the co-chairs will acknowledge you. There is no public comment portion of this meeting. Members of the public are able to join, watch, and listen only.
Great. Thank you, Keith. I just want to make a quick note. If you guys have comments, questions, concerns, feedback, we do have that discussion portion of the meeting set at the very end there. But if there's anything that I'm covering today, anything that Sarah covers, or anything that other group members bring up, feel free to chime in. We can have a conversation about whatever that discussion topic may be. So I think the next item on the agenda that we need to cover is approval of the May meeting minutes. Before I make a motion to have those approved, does anyone have any edits or adjustments to those meeting minutes as they currently stand? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
I move to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
I second it.
All right. May meeting minutes are approved. All right, so we're going to jump into our first agenda topic here, metrics updates around our Supporting Transformation to Empower People initiative. I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen play out to date. I want to talk about what it looks like as we kind of move into the last year of the ARPA period, what that means for STEP, what that means for some of the progress that we've made there. And I want to do a little comparison with all of you and talk a little bit about the successful placements we've seen and how those stack up to the original goals that we set when we originally rolled out STEP, right? Because we had developed some targets for how many individuals on the day and residential side we wanted to see successfully transitioned to new community-based supports as part of this initiative. And same thing with some of those incentive dollars that the department allocated to the STEP initiative. I want to talk a little bit about how many of those, how much of those incentive dollars have been paid out to providers who have met objectives within their transformation plans, and how that stacks up against that 24 million that was originally allocated to the initiative. So we'll kind of dive into this. On the outset of the rollout of STEP, we had wanted 200 individuals successfully placed at the end of this as part of the kind of day component to STEP. And then on the residential side, the team had developed a target number of 100 successful transitions on the residential side. Currently, as it stands, and I don't know what the last update you guys got was, but we have 42 individuals collectively that have successfully been placed through the STEP initiative. And I think some folks internally, to be frank with everyone on the call, some folks internally in the department, I think find those numbers to be a little bit deflating, right? I think they look at, we'd set a goal of 300 individuals successfully being placed through this initiative, and we only have 42. And what try to continue to remind folks of is, we still have a year left here. And if this continues to kind of play and roll out as it has been doing, I would expect somewhere in the ballpark of 100 plus individuals at the end of the ARPA period having been successfully placed through the department STEP initiative. And another thing that I would like to remind folks, and I've heard some folks on this call bring this up throughout the past couple of years, I've heard folks internally to DDS bring this up, successful transitions and transitions from congregate to non-congregate settings, while it does occur through the department STEP initiative, it is also work that goes on outside of STEP, right? You providers and DDS staff have been facilitating these transitions for a long time. It's not unique to the STEP initiative. I think one thing that STEP allowed the department to do was to kind of pull back the curtain on some of the work that we were doing around promoting community-based service options and promoting the transition from congregate day and residential settings. And it allowed us to kind of show that work to individuals and families, folks who maybe aren't familiar with the work that goes on within DDS, and the legislators that make these policy decisions, these budgetary decisions that impact our department. So I like to kind of keep that in mind. Mike, I see you got your hand up. What do you got?
So Michael Beloff, board member and parent. I think two other pieces to keep in mind when we're transitioning individuals from a congregate day to an employment setting is there are two kind of factors that act against the process. I think the first is actually finding the jobs for people is real tough. I don't know, for many agencies, sometimes it can be an issue of not knowing how to find jobs for folks. And I think a lot of it is individuals with disabilities are underemployed to begin with. And for folks who are just starting employment, finding that first job or finding that second job can be extremely challenging and is outside the purview of what's happening here. I think, secondly, there are some families that are concerned in going from my kid being active and engaged 30 hours a week from 9 to 3 in a day program, going to where, well, they're probably only going to be working 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a week. And what the heck are they going to be doing the rest of the time to keep them active and engaged? And that may be some resistance from family members. And I think those two factors may be part of why we're seeing less folks rotate out. It's hard to control. We can't control if there are jobs out there for folks. I think making sure that for those folks who are moving from, a full 30-hour program to employment, that there are programs in place and funding in place to allow them to be active and engaged on the times where they're not employed.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS project coordinator. I appreciate those comments, Michael, and I would say that you're certainly not the only one that has voiced those concerns or those opinions around some of the struggles the department has had in terms of moving individuals towards more customized employment options. And I think, part of this, and I think we expected it, we've seen it across the board, both on the day and residential side. There's been some hesitancy on behalf of the guardians, the family members. Sometimes there's been hesitancy on behalf of the individual and whether or not they can be successful in that new environment. And, I don't think it would be worthwhile to transition somebody away from a setting where they are actively engaged and they're developing those skill sets into like a customized employment if they're not going to be getting that kind of robust wraparound of supports and that experience that they need to kind of grow and develop. So point well taken. I know it's something that the EDS team, our Employment and Day Services Division, has kind of been looking into over the past couple of years. And I think something that we've had a little bit of a difficult time with, and we're kind of putting more resources towards, is building that bridge between the department, provider agencies, and potential employers out in the community. I think I did a little research the other day, and I may be a little off target here. I think there are, in the U.S. alone, I think there are 6.2 million folks who have some sort of intellectual disability, and only 36% of those have paid employment. So, I think that's something to kind of be cognizant of, as we kind of work towards moving more individuals towards competitive employment that really kind of gets them engaged in learning new skill sets. I'm going to backtrack a little bit and talk about those numbers again. So we have 42 successful placements. It breaks down like this. We have 23 individuals that have been successfully placed on the day side, 19 that have been successfully placed on the res side. So when you stack that up against those original targets that we had developed, I think at this point in time, it's safe to say we're kind of well below that threshold. We do expect from conversations that we've had with some of our resource administrators and regional leadership for those some of these provider agencies that have been developing day program curriculums and other kind of tools to help better facilitate these transitions to start actively, having their plan roll out. So I think throughout the next year, you're going to see that number 42 kind of gradually climb. But I think it's safe to say at this point with STEP, we've seen kind of a slow burn. Some provider agencies have had a lot of success getting the individual that wants to transition within the time frame that they had established. And then there are other agencies that have come to us with some concerns. They've had individuals back out. They've had individuals question whether or not they're going to be adequately equipped to be successful in that new environment. And we expected that and we wanted to see that, right? We don't want that provider agency, that case manager, that support team to be promoting something that the individual is not comfortable with pursuing. So again, I tell folks not to be discouraged by that number. Does it stack up well against that initial target of 300? At this point, no. But I'd ask you to consider the implications around each one of those individual transitions. The secondary and tertiary effects there. You have family members that get to watch that individual move into that new environment, learn new skills, develop an understanding of what resources and activities are available in that new community setting. So there's certainly exciting stuff happening there. And again, there's a lot of this work that's happening outside of the STEP initiative as well. Dr. Ellis?
Hi, Gunnar. Thank you. Welcome back. Cheryl Ellis, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I know I've asked this question before in terms of us collecting equity data. I think it's going to be important for us to keep that on our radar as we look at this, and it's going to likely be something we have to report out. And if by chance there is a way to also gauge how long the transitions are taking, I don't know if we're doing that as well, but I think that might be important information for us to have.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS Project Coordinator. Sarah, I saw you come on camera. Do you have a response there before I get to Dr. Ellis?
Yeah, I think I remember you've raised this issue before, and that is something that we've been tracking. So we don't go through and do a full update on DEI data kind of every month. We sort of did one in January. It's probably about time to just check in and see if those numbers and demographic information has shifted substantially. But we are tracking that, and we will be able to report out on that. And if you have sort of specific inquiries or you'd like to have a more involved conversation on that, would be happy to set up some time and walk through that. That's definitely very doable. In terms of the amount of time that the transition takes, I think that's an interesting question. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of ways that we could talk about how long the transition takes. I mean, to switch from placement types, that sort of happens in a single day. We pay the transition for, 6 months, that the new provider is eligible for up to 6 months of payments. That doesn't really reflect anything about how the individual is experiencing the transition. It just sort of reflects how long the individual has been there. So I think we could, put some more discussion into what do we mean by how long the transition is taking and what are we looking to measure there. But I think that's an interesting question for further exploration.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS Project Coordinator. Thank you, Dr. Ellis, for that question, and Sarah for that input there. Dr. Ellis, I do want to extend an apology. I think you had brought that question up at one of the last meetings that I had attended. I know Sarah's tracking that, but it had fallen off my radar. So, just making a mental note here to kind of stay on top of that and keep your DEI team informed as we kind of move forward here. Heather.
Hi, Heather Latorre from Marrakesh. I'm just responding to what Michael said because we've heard this and we know that's a big problem. But I was under the assumption that DDS is doing, we got an email about redesigning day program, and I thought that that was in direct response to what Michael is talking about. So I think that's what we're doing now, is trying to figure out, what kind of full day program people that are working still may have on that. So I just wanted to bring it up that it's definitely not being ignored, because I think Michael and all of us has said that a million times. So I think that there really is something going on if anyone has more information about that. I know there was one meeting, but I didn't get the information about it yet. But I know my staff attended.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS ARPA Project Coordinator. Thank you, Heather. Sarah, I don't know if you want to provide a little bit of context around the EEO, EES?
Yeah, Heather, thank you so much for raising that, because absolutely that is the intent. And I think EES in particular is targeted towards folks who are in employment, but maybe want some additional enrichment services to go along with that employment. And that's really, focused on kind of helping them maintain soft skills or vocational advancement. It's really designed to meet that kind of a need. So really appreciate you raising that. I know there's going to be more informational sessions within the next couple of weeks coming up. So if you missed the first ones, that there will be more, and would encourage you to learn more about that.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS ARPA Project Coordinator. Thank you, Sarah, for that overview. All right, so we talked a little bit about successful placements through STEP. Again, we're going to have to kind of sit and see how this plays out through the next year. But, I'm going to hope that we can get over that 100 successful transition threshold. And again, as these numbers continue to climb, I'd encourage you to consider that those secondary and tertiary effects, how these successful placements are impacting not only the individual and their personal growth, but the family member, the guardian, the case manager that gets to experience supporting that individual as they move to that new environment. I find that to be particularly exciting. Keep an eye on that as we kind of move through the next year. In terms of incentive dollars that have been paid out to providers that have approved transformation plans, currently, and Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're just a bit over $1.5 million that have been paid out to providers that have met various objectives within their transformation plans, whether those dollars are for vacancy payments, completing successful transitions, training and equipping their staff in the use of assistive technology. Those incentive dollars continue to be paid out. And, I had an opportunity to speak with Sarah yesterday. We're going to be doing another data poll on July 25th. So we're going to get fresh updates on the number of successful placements, fresh updates on the number of incentive or the amount of incentive dollars that have been paid out to date. But again, when you compare that 1.5 million to the 24 million that we had originally allocated to this initiative, there's kind of a stark contrast, obviously. And again, I think, some of that was due to the fact that I think we were limited in our resources, in terms of getting this initiative up off the ground. And it's taken a while for some of these provider agencies to start to transition folks to these community-based support options. So we're hopeful that number is going to continue to climb. But just wanted to give you an update there. I think that is it in terms of metrics updates that I wanted to give to all of you. The other agenda item that I wanted to discuss was the wind down of Deloitte's contract. As you guys know, Deloitte was a contractor that we hired that played a pivotal role in developing kind of the framework to our Supporting Transformation to Empower People initiative, and played a critical role in supporting providers who submitted transformation plans, and played a critical role in helping us develop and communicate on the initiative itself. So their contract wound down on June 30th. And I think the biggest loss that we've recognized there is Deloitte had facilitated over the past couple of years Technical assistance hours, again, to support providers who had questions pertaining to their transformation plans. What we have done is instructed our resource administrators and resource management teams to, at their quarterly updates with providers who have approved plans, to let those folks know that any questions coming down on plan modifications should be directed to that resource administrator or that assigned resource manager. So I think it's going to take a bit of time for our team internally to kind of identify other gaps that are created by Deloitte's exit from this initiative, but wanted to update you guys there. Any questions, comments pertaining to some of the information that I just covered, some of the metrics, Deloitte's contract winding down? Heather.
Hi, it's Heather from Marrakesh. I was just wondering if there is a specific person at DDS who expertise is in supportive housing, because that is something that we're looking to transition a couple programs to, and just like the expert on it that would be able to help us with that.
Sure. Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS project coordinator. Heather, I would ask that you reach out to Elba Caraballo. I can put her contact information in the chat. She's our director of housing, and can kind of help facilitate conversation there.
Thank you. I did get her name, so okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. At this point in time, I think that is it for the 2 agenda items that I wanted to cover with you guys. Again, if you have questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to bring them up in that discussion portion. Dr. Ellis, you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Gunnar. Cheryl Ellis, Director, DEI, DDS. You had mentioned Deloitte's exit. Did they leave any specific recommendations regarding the steps in the process, or will you talk about that at a different time?
So Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS ARPA project coordinator. So Deloitte did compile what they called a final report, which helped outline the development of the initiative, the 2 different phases. So phase 1 being those initial providers who submitted transformation plans. And then phase 2 was expanding the initiative to allow for restructuring only plans. The employment and day services, EEO, EES spinoff that Sarah just covered. And they do leave, I think, a few recommendations as to how the department should proceed. And I think if I could underscore one of the more important ones, it would be to continue to involve providers and gather critical feedback from not only those provider agencies, but the individuals that are participating in these transitions around how we can improve communication efforts going forward. I think one of the ways the department, I don't mean to use the word struggle, but I can't figure out another way to kind of describe it. I think one of the ways we struggled is kind of changing guidance around the initiative and also communicating adequately enough to where all stakeholders really understood what it was we were trying to do as a department with the STEP initiative. So I'll put a link in the chat, Dr. Ellis, and for those of you on the call that are interested, a link in the chat to that final report so you can review it and look at some of those other recommendations that Deloitte made. But again, a lot of it has to do with the way the department communicated the different aspects of the initiative and at what point we involved different stakeholders in the development of it. Any other questions before we move on to the next agenda item? All right, Sarah, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Sarah Oleminek, ARPA Planning Manager. There was a question at the last meeting, where a request for just an update on vacancies, STEP vacancies. What is the status of those? We were able to dedicate some bandwidth to reviewing those and wanted to give you an update. So at the time of the review, we were looking at 23 day vacancies and 19 residential vacancies. I think in line with our expectations, day vacancies seem to be filling faster than residential vacancies. When I looked as of today, of the day vacancies that are eligible for payment, for certain reasons, if someone's coming from a different provider to the actual provider that has the plan, there may be a few vacancies that sort of wouldn't count because of technicalities. But of those that are eligible, which is around 20, all of those had been filled for the day vacancies. For the res vacancies, there were a good number still open. So there were 19 total. Of those 19, there were 11 that are still empty as of today. Now, those have been spread out over the past over a year now. So of the 10 vacancies that opened up in 2023, all but 2 of those have been filled. And the other vacancies that are still open, the majority of them are still within their 6 months of Z2 eligibility, with that kind of slated to end in August, September, October. And then there's a couple of those vacancies that started in 2023 that have aged out of that transition funding, but that have not been filled by someone moving into that spot. So I think at a high level, residential transitions are taking longer than day transitions. And I think that was our expectation and is reflected in the fact that we offer a longer time for that transition and vacancy funding. For residential transitions, we offer 6 months, whereas for day transitions, providers are only eligible for up to 4 months. So I think it looks like it's progressing according to our expectations. It'll be interesting to see, since we've had more movement on the res side just within the last few months, how soon those vacancies that have opened up recently do fill. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And in the next few months, we'll do another round of analysis and see what the status is of those residential vacancies. Any follow-up questions on that? Doesn't look like it. Gunnar, I think that's back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS ARPA project coordinator. So I don't have a problem with how quickly we moved through that agenda. That's really all we had for discussion topics for you guys today. I hope I did an okay job kind of articulating some of the successful placement data and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes in my mind, that's just a bit tricky to kind of convey to groups, but it is kind of the open discussion portion of the agenda. So I want to turn it over to you guys if you have comments, questions. If you have feedback, I know there are a couple providers on the call that have approved transformation plans with the department. If you have feedback on the way that the department can make adjustments, not only with STEP, but just on the rollout of initiatives moving forward, feel free to use the raise hand function, raise your hand. We can close out. When you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Whenever's the executive director of the ARC Connecticut. I just sort of am still modestly stunned about the numbers. And so I guess my questions are kind of general. Did you encounter anything large that caused a lack of progress that just was not sort of thought of? That'd be the first question. The second question is, what's the future of ARPA and what's going on? What does that look like absence the federal money?
Gunnar Abrahamson, ARPA project coordinator for DDS. Good questions there. I'm not sure my answers are going to be able to satisfy you on this. In terms of major issues that we ran into with the rollout of STEP, with getting traction in terms of participation from providers, nothing immediately comes to mind. I think one of the things I think was difficult in the initial rollout is I want to put this delicately. I don't think folks were incorrect in saying this, but I think there was some questioning of the initiative itself and its goal of moving individuals from congregate settings to community-based supports. I think there was some confusion on behalf of different stakeholders that, this work was already occurring, and that there was more or less a lack of buy-in. And right, I understand that. I don't think that assumption is wrong, but I think it was difficult for us to get traction there. And I wasn't on board with the ARPA team at the time, but there was some shifting in the naming of the initiative. There was some changing of guidance, and I think that's kind of par for the course for any agency that's rolling out a large initiative, but especially for state government. We're not necessarily nimble in our ability to receive hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government, turn around and stand up various projects and initiatives. So I think part of it was our fault for kind of the lag in the beginning, in adequately communicating what it was we were trying to do with the initiative. And I think, and again, I'm just being frank here. I think sometimes we had difficulty with our consultants in the way that certain things were being messaged, and we would have to kind of go back and change things up. So it was a little bit of a rocky start. And again, we were dealing with a compressed time frame, right? It's very difficult to stand that all up in 2 years, get providers to be interested, get them to submit plans, and then begin those transitions. I think the timeline associated with the availability of ARPA funds put an immense amount of pressure on the department to kind of turn around quickly and roll this thing out. And I think that was problematic. Was it an end all be all? No. But I think we would have had an easier go of this if that ARPA period was a bit broader. Sarah?
Yeah, I would echo that, and I would also add a couple of points there. I think, looking at the numbers, there's a couple of questions there. Question one, why weren't more plans submitted or more transitions explored? And Gunnar, I think the points you outlined touch on some of the reasons why that might be the case. I think in terms of the plans that were submitted, we do know some of the barriers there. I think one piece of it is that at the start of the initiative and throughout, the agency, the regions have really been encouraging providers to be ambitious in their approach to this, to think outside the box, to imagine what could be possible for the individuals they work with. And by definition of doing that, some of those things include supporting individuals for something that in the end, they may or may not actually choose to follow through with. And so I think providers, if they felt that there was a reasonable chance that that individual might choose to transition, could include that person on the plan. And then if ultimately the individual, the team decided that wasn't the right move, that person didn't transition. So I think just in the way we designed the program, we sort of encouraged providers to, include all the individuals they thought there was a reasonable chance might participate, and shouldn't necessarily be surprised to see that actual number be lower. I think the other piece of this is, and this was communicated to us by some providers who submitted plans, that there were things that would be possible for their agency, assuming that kind of ongoing staffing shortages were resolved. And I know that for many folks, that just hasn't happened. And so even though there were folks who may have been able to transition, just having that capacity just hasn't quite fallen into place. And I think no one really knew that that would still be the case a year ago now. So I think that has also been a challenge for folks.
Yep. Thank you for that, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
And
Wynn,
thank you.
Do you mind repeating that second question that you had?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what the future of step-like initiatives, supportive housing, et cetera, are going forward.
So I think pertaining to supportive housing, that's going to be a service that is ongoing within the department. That certainly is not impacted by the end of the availability of those federal funds. As it pertains to STEP, I think the department is still in the decision-making process of what this looks like after next year's deadline expires. I think the idea of STEP, right, the promotion of for those individuals who are interested in movement to those community-based supports lives on. I think that's something that's important to the department and important to providers and individuals alike. In terms of what the department plans to do with some of that funding that we're now anticipating we're not going to spend, that was tied to the STEP initiative, those decisions are being made way above my pay grade. I think the best I can offer you there, Win, is when our CFO, our leadership comes down and gives us guidance, if appropriate, I'm more than happy to come in here and let you guys know what the plan is there.
Thank you.
I did see a hand up while I was having that discussion, Shannon.
Yeah, this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. That was really my question, Gunnar, was, what was the plan for any, monies that haven't been spent or you don't anticipate spending, but I guess we'll just wait to hear about that.
And, one final point I want to make there, and I feel pretty comfortable saying this, is the commissioner and leadership within DDS is adamant that we do not want to return federal dollars to the federal government, right? This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I will tell you, these conversations started long before, February of this year when I exited for military leave. There were discussions going on around the budget and the expected federal dollars that we're now anticipating we're not going to spend, and where can we shift those to have the largest impact on our provider agencies and the individuals who receive services through the department. So the department's been aware of this for some time. I think what you're going to see is us just start to get more creative with the ways in which we can spend some of that federal money. But when, look, that's a hard conversation to have. And I understand your disappointment, I've kind of always tried to act as a cheerleader for this initiative. And I think there's still some important work going on. I think there's still going to be considerable progress, but I'm not sure it's going to stack up well against what we initially set as goals and what we initially had allocated in terms of federal money. I think the important piece here moving forward is going to be those lessons learned, how we can improve on this the next time we roll out an initiative or the next time our agency receives those federal dollars. I think that's going to be kind of a critical piece to what we take away from this, Shannon.
So this is Shannon Jacobino, DDS ombudsperson. I think that there has been a huge shift in the mindset over the past 3 years, and I think a lot of it had to do with ARPA, so perhaps we haven't reached the numbers that we wanted to reach, but I think the door has now been opened. And in terms of what people's expectations are, I know certainly supported housing is something that a lot of individuals and families are wanting, and I think it's a great model. So I think, our community has had a big shift in terms of what people's expectations are for their loved ones, and what we all expect people to have in terms of having a good life, greater independence, more access to the community. So I think that that's a good thing. I mean, sure, we'd like to have seen a much bigger transformation in terms of what providers were offering. But I think that will also happen because there's going to be a demand for those services as well. So we're not done.
Thanks, Shannon. Adriana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adriana Ramirez, Executive Director of CTFSN. I wanted to echo what Shannon was saying because I think one of the biggest successes, as Shannon was talking about, is really the short-term timeline pushed for innovation, pushed for idea brainstorming, thinking outside the box, where parents have always said, why can't we change things? Why is so rigid? And I think this initiative really did that, not only for providers, but for DDS, and really, coming together and bringing families, bringing other voices, but also looking at other partner states of how have they done it. So it really expanded possibilities versus like parents get the diagnosis, your child will never do XYZ. This initiative did for the system, I think, of strengths-based. What can we do? What is possible? Let's try mixing things, especially in this example we were just talking about a few conversations ago about the barrier of going to employment, and then the concern from parents that now you're on this one-to-one with someone, and now their family members are not getting that social engagement or being around groups and that fun time. And that has pushed, I think, DDS to reconsider how budgets and how funding is being used for those types of programs to allow for the employment part of it, that maybe it only is a few hours compared to 30, but how can it be supplemented within their budget to also include that social engagement? So I just wanted to echo what Shannon was saying, that really it has pushed, and those providers that continue with that thought process and that innovation will be that we're the pioneers in this. We are going to be the future leaders in supporting new initiatives and thinking outside the box, along with the leadership in DDS, and those that hopefully will be the example and be like the benchmark maybe holders, where other providers can see them as examples, and hopefully these providers can become mentors for others, because we need everyone to be in it to be able to support the community that we have in Connecticut. Thank you.
Gunnar Abrahamson, DDS Project Coordinator. Thank you, Adriana. And again, thank you, Shannon. And Wynn for bringing up those points. I think some of the more important conversations we have are answering some of those tough questions. That's why you guys are on the advisory committee. That input, that feedback, and your opinions are a critical piece to what adjustments we make moving forward. So while we're on that topic, does anyone else have any feedback? Some of you folks that have participated in the initiative, some of you that have sat back and watched how this has played out. Do you have thoughts, input, concerns? Amy?
I got myself up here. Amy Montemuro at Ableist. Two parts. The residential, I think we had a great success story. So other parents who were intimidated and concerned are super excited. So now we have 3 more people that are moving out, and it's a great process. The one concern that I have is if my team, if they're not bringing it up at the team meetings, it's not discussed. So I think it would be helpful if, I don't know what the training is on the DDS side. I don't know, what the case managers are doing, and it just has become my responsibility, my team's responsibility to be creative. And I think it would be helpful if the training on DDS side for all the case managers was pretty consistent.
And Amy, are you specifically referencing training around the initiative, like
Yeah,
in terms
just
of what?
when you're talking about options, like listening to what's happening around the state, listening to the success stories. So when the case managers are at team meetings, they can guide the teams and offer new creative suggestions for each individual. So, I just think it's, this is a team process. I think it would be helpful if, the organizations aren't the only ones that are bringing up, what the possibilities are.
I appreciate that feedback, Amy. We do have a dedicated case manager office hours for STEP. It's open to any case manager that wants to come in and participate. And oddly enough, next month, we are going to begin bringing up case managers who have individuals on their caseloads that are participating in a STEP transition as part of the transformation plan, to talk a little bit about what that innovation within the plan looks like, talk about what the individual's experience was, and talk about those lessons learned. We have not done that to date. We've rolled out FAQs and other documents to help give case managers an understanding of how the initiative functions, but that's certainly something I'll take back to Wayne Seidel, our director of case management, and some of the leadership. Point well taken there. Appreciate that. Michael?
Michael Beloff, agency board member and parent. And this is not a criticism of ARPA in this sense, but the focus of ARPA has very much been transitioning individuals from more restrictive environments to less restrictive environments for those individuals with funding, especially on the residential side. I think what has been missing, and I guess this may not be the purview of this particular committee, is for the vast majority of families within the DDS system who don't have housing and don't have residential dollars yet, how these changes to how we're providing residential supports outside of the more restrictive group home environments, how might that impact those families, how it might free up money for more people, how there might be more opportunities for perhaps public-private partnerships for these new modalities of residential that we're exploring, and how that might open up to other families. I think that's a big piece that's missing, may not be the purview of this committee, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed by DDS.
Gunnar Abrahamson, ARPA project coordinator. I'll give a response there, Michael, but I'll ask my colleagues, Keith, Sarah, Shannon, if they want to chime in, if I kind of misrepresent or miss anything here in my response. I think the department has acknowledged that when individuals, and again, I'm not sure of all the nuances behind this, but when an individual transitions from a congregate setting like a group home to a more community-based support options, there is substantial savings that occurs there. And there have been conversations around, how does that funding shift, or how does that impact our budget and our ability to support individuals who maybe don't have access to those resources. I will say, just given the nature of the bureaucracy of the state, it's not an easy fix. It's not an easy conversation. But people are aware that is a concern, not just of you, but providers and family members. What do you got?
Michael Beloff again, and I think it's more just, and I think you're correct. One of the reasons why there was an emphasis in past years on CCHs is because it is a lower cost way of providing housing for some appropriate families. What I'm thinking of, there are lots of families there are kids who may be appropriate for the less restrictive types of things we've been talking about, home shares and all the different developments that we're going through, the I-dashes, although for the life of me, I don't know what they're called anymore, and I can't find the information on the website anymore. But the I-dash was a wonderful concept that I understand is limited by some of the grants that are not available anymore. But for families to understand there's different modalities of residential besides just what they think of as a group home, because they think of a CLS, to them, CRS is a group home, even though it's not a group home, and I get that. But that there are different modalities for how their child can be living in the community. And I don't know that's been communicated to the families who don't have residential yet as to what may be a possibility, what they may be able to build in partnership with DDS and perhaps with some private dollars as well for those families who can commit to those, and helping to expand, because that's the big fear for every family that I've ever spoken to is, I have to die before my kid gets residential. That's what they've always been told. That may or may not be the case, but there may be other opportunities for them to build and to do things. And I think that needs to be communicated.
Shannon?
So I do think that DDS has done a lot to try to educate people about other opportunities. There's the Fourth Tuesday forums that happen every month. People have access to that information. I agree, though, that there are even people who do have residential funding. There have been funding initiatives, where there are many families who have funding now who can't find a group home, but there are other options. And what I would like to see more of, because a lot of those families will reach out to me feeling very frustrated that, now they have funding, but they can't find a group home. And I don't find that it's typical for families, even those who have funding, to there isn't a real proactive approach on trying to talk to them about what other options might exist for them. And, that's not necessarily, that goes beyond this meeting. But I do think, that is something that needs to happen, that all families should be from day one be getting information about what kinds of, options are out there so that they can start to think and plan for the future. And try to figure out what's going to work best for them because there are, there's CCH, there are funding initiatives right now that mean that nobody has to be on a waiting list if they really, really want to start planning and they really want to move their loved one, out of their home and into the community. Most people can do that now. There isn't really a waiting list unless you're sort of focused on having a group home or some kind of housing that just may not be available. I know a lot of families want supported housing, but it's just not widely available in every area of the state yet. But there are other options, and I think being able to really work with people to see those options as opportunities, and help them to fully understand those options so that they can see the opportunity instead of kind of saying, no, that's not going to work for my kid.
Thank you, Shannon. Gunnar Abrahamson from DDS ARPA Project Coordinator. Adriana, you got your hand up. What do you got?
Yeah, no, Shannon always brings up great points and reminds me of things. And when we speak to parents and things, we always talk about the cliff. And I think cliff are those big transitions. And you have the cliff of transitioning from school to adulthood or adult services. And I think they also have the other cliff that we're talking about currently is housing, where it's you do that other transition now where you're transitioning out of home into another type of community living or supported community living or group home, whatever that looks like. And I think we should look at it as that new cliff for parents to really understand what that process can look like. And like Shannon said, potentially plan, look at. And I think talking about DDS too, there's talking about the providers as Heather, I think, no, Amy mentioned about the providers being the creative ones. And I've mentioned this in another meeting a while back, hearing some case managers in a public meeting talking about creative ways they've supported individuals in their caseload. And I would love to see, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it would be great to have sharing that creative knowledge amongst all case managers to help in an education basis to show, highlight those creative ideas or how someone did something in a way that supported an individual that nobody thought of before versus potentially just keeping it within that person, that department, that region or something, but really spread that education to be able to spark innovation, spark ideas. So I ended up talking about two different things, but Shannon kind of sparked that idea in me. So thank you. I think it's like Shannon said, it's education, planning, understanding the different process, different availabilities. And a lot of people are confused when it comes to supportive housing because they feel DDS is the one funding it and not really understanding the municipality part, the developer part, the provider. So I think once they realize that and the other options that they have in housing, meaning wrap certificates, different other options, because I think they the community feels that a lot of this housing is DDS funding it, and DDS is the one that's giving people access versus understanding what actually is all available and what supportive housing actually is and how much involved or which parts is DDS involved in and who else are the stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. Amy?
I was just thinking, if you had a list of maybe mentors of providers who've gone through the different process, it might be helpful. So if you have a provider that has, Heather's asking, for people in supported housing, Ableist could provide, we would be on a list, they can call us because maybe even the the materials that are provided, we work with resource management. It's a little, overwhelming for some of the staff that are working on it. Just helping people through the process so they have another provider to kind of mentor them. So those who have the 19 or on residential and the 42, seeing what organization would be happy to help other organizations get a point person so that maybe it's provider, which, we all kind of speak the same language. It might be easier.
Senator Abrahamson from DDS. Absolutely. Amy, we did have our consultant Deloitte that was facilitating conversations like that, where they were bringing in providers that had kind of lived the experience and had them kind of train up other providers who were interested in submitting a plan or participating in a particular initiative or community-based support option for some of the individuals that they were going to transition. I think that's something that as a department, we need to kind of continue to focus on. And Adriana, to your point, there's never too much. You can never be doing too much internal communication around sharing kind of creative ways that folks can support individuals that transition, whether it's a part of STEP or outside of that initiative. So, I will say, I think the department and our consultants did a good job developing a number of communication materials for providers, case managers, DDS staff to kind of inform them what it was we were trying to do with STEP, what the outcomes, what we wanted the outcomes to be. I'll put a link in the chat to some of those resources that are available. But again, those lessons learned are important, right? I think next time we pursue something like this or one of these little smaller programs or initiatives the department rolls out, we take that feedback that we get from you guys with us to try and make those improvements moving forward. So that's again, really it for what we have for discussion today. I want to make sure that folks don't have any other topics they want to raise before we close out here. Anything else we wanted to raise for discussion before the meeting comes to a close? All right. At this point, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. Made by Wynn Everts. Do I have a second?
Heather Latora from Americash.
Seconded by Heather. All right, so this meeting is adjourned. Again, as always, appreciate your contributions to the conversation, your feedback. It is critical. So hope you guys have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your summer, and we'll see you in September. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.